The reason I could withstand the storm is that I knew that if I capitulated to it, there would be no Israel. It's as simple as that. If you look at where Israel was before the October 7th attack and where it is today, we're actually stronger. We are rightly considered the strongest power in the Middle East. And when you're strong, nations come to you.
And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman. We're still here in Jerusalem. I've been here for the last several weeks for the Jewish holidays, and it's been a momentous time to be here. It's been a historic time to be here. I was lucky enough to be at the Knesset, at the Israeli parliament, to see President Donald Trump give his momentous speech. It was incredible. It was funny. He had the entire state of Israel, the entire Knesset for sure, the entire room, eating out of the palm of his hands, making jokes, calling for the pardon of the prime minister, showing really the support that the state of Israel has from the United States of America. The United States, for sure, under President Trump, is the strongest ally the state of Israel has in this world and maybe has ever had. Of course, the ceasefire deal itself, the 20-point deal, to be here for that. We were at an event the night before the deal was actually signed, or when they said it was going to be signed, and everyone's waiting, is Hamas actually going to return the hostages? Was with Omer Shem Tov and other released hostages that very evening by luck. And just seeing the excitement, the mixture of excitement and fear and doubt of what was going to happen, the amount of pressure just building up around the state of Israel, and seeing that be released as the hostages came home. I was able to visit with the families of some of the hostages that were just released, and just to see the smiles on their face, the blood back in their faces and their muscles sort of looking beautiful again, their hair cut and just their energy back. Life was blown back into their souls with their loved ones coming home. Being here for that was just special, a moment that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Of course, we had J.D. Vance here this week. Marco Rubio was here this week as well, the Secretary of State, our former senator from the state of Florida. Just everything that's been happening here, the change, the turning of the page from the end of this war. And of course, there's lots of questions. For those of us who follow this closely, not everything is black and white. I think just to be clear, this was the right deal at the right time from my perspective. The best deal that Israel can get. We have the hostages home, the living hostages, to be clear. If I'm not mistaken, at the time of this recording, there's 13 still dead bodies that are being held hostage in Gaza. It seems like Hamas is trying to delay it so they don't have to go to the next phase, which is demilitarization of Gaza. So they're trying to delay it, and then many people say they can't find all the bodies. Only time will tell. And not so many people have read the plan. I urge everyone to go online. You can find the 20-point plan, read it, and you'll find a few things. One, that from my perspective, it's not really something possible for Hamas to actually comply with, right? To fully demilitarize, to fully take themselves out of power. It's a difficult thing, but I think maybe that was the strategy there. Because if they don't, then we know what can happen. But we're also seeing that the U.S. is pushing an ISF, an International Stabilization Force, to go into Gaza. From my perspective, I don't think we're going to see foreign troops in Gaza. I'm not sure which country in the world would actually want to put their boots on the ground there and face whatever's remaining Hamas. It's not their fight. It didn't work with UNIFIL in Lebanon. It's not going to work in Gaza, but that's the process, and that's what got us here. Now, I'm going to take you in to an interview that I just came from. I ran over here to the studios in JNS on the other side of Jerusalem because I was able and honored to interview the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, at his offices. We had a tremendous conversation. We spoke about all the issues that are at the forefront now, or maybe not all of them, because I think you could speak to him for hours and hours, but try to go through some of the main issues to get his perspective. The first thing we spoke about was a ceasefire deal. Is it a good deal or is it a bad deal? Why or why not? Right? Hearing it straight from him. What price did we pay for this hostage deal? Why was it the right deal at the right time? We spoke about the ability, actually, I mentioned it here in the introduction, for there to be a Hamas-free Gaza. We'll hear what he has to say about that, about the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, or at least the concept of it. We spoke about also the Abraham Accords. If you recall, before October 7th, the state of Israel had really changed along with Donald Trump from his first term. Remember Ambassador David Friedman, who's a friend of so many of us, were able to change the dynamics in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. Jared Kushner, of course, played a huge role in his team, Aryeh Lightstone, and everybody involved. And then everything stopped with October 7th. And we know that Hamas was looking at Saudi Arabia potentially signing on to Abraham Accords and didn't want that to happen because that would really change the dynamics of the Middle East. So I was always wondering, I hope you were as well. Now, what's going to happen with the Abraham Accords now moving forward? What's Israel's stance today? Where does Israel stand today with its neighbors at the end of this war? We've seen the good and the bad. And we got into a topic that I always talk about because it's a complicated topic, but it's an important one that most people ignore. The fact that Israel, the neighbors that it has, so therefore those entities and countries that they have to make deals with are, to be delicate, imperfect countries, like Qatar and Turkey in particular. And one thing that's worried me personally, and I'll share that with you, is now the standing that Qatar and even Turkey have in the world, or it seems so, right? They've taken this big role in negotiating this deal, but we all know also they're also purveyors of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment all over the world with Al Jazeera. They funded Hamas, et cetera, et cetera. Turkey is not much better, if not, in fact, they're probably worse. You can listen to my episode last week with member of Knesset Amichai Chikli. We spoke about that at length. So I wanted to hear from the Prime Minister, and I was able to ask him, what can we make of these countries that play both sides? So they're here supporting the West, but they're also taking strong positions contrary to the interests of Israel, the United States, and the greater West. So we spoke about that. I'm going through my notes here with you guys. It just came straight from the studio, so you can get a little idea of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the U.S.'s support, the President Trump's visit in the Knesset, what it meant to the Prime Minister. Also, the comments last week that may have been troublesome for many people, for me as well, about Judea and Samaria and annexation from the U.S. administration, saying that they're not going to allow that to happen, making their beliefs known. We asked that to the Prime Minister, got a very direct response. And then, of course, a little bit of personal questions about how he feels now on this side of the matter, this side of the October 7th war. And it was a really interesting conversation. I wish it hadn't ended. I wish we had another hour to speak to him, but just to have a taste where now, just on a personal note for my listeners and viewers, this is episode, if I'm not mistaken, 95 or 96 of this podcast that we started about a year and 10 months ago. And to be sitting with the Prime Minister of Israel, we've spoken to the Speaker of the Knesset here, we've spoken to several members of Knesset. In the United States side, we've spoken with many members of Congress, senators, governors, mayors, business leaders, thought leaders, think tank folks. But this is really the cherry on the cake to be able to do that. I want to thank my producer, Tila, for helping make that happen as well. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Listen, you don't have to agree with everything he says or everything I say, but just being able to get in the room there to be able to ask 20 minutes worth of questions from the Prime Minister of Israel as this war has come to a close and we're going now into the phases of this deal, to phase 2 of this deal, was a huge privilege that I'm sharing with you to be sitting there with me. This is Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. I know it's been a whirlwind of a week with the deal. President Trump was in town. The hostages, the living hostages were released. Vance, Rubio, it doesn't end. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, pleasure being with you.
So let's just jump right in. The ceasefire deal, a 20-point plan. Like I said, the hostages were released. Hamas is now a small fraction of what it once was. Israel is inside in the perimeter. Now that the dust is starting to settle, some of the joy is starting to dissipate from bringing home the hostages, people are starting to evaluate and question on both sides. Everybody has an opinion. Why is the deal that Israel entered into the right deal at the right time?
Well, because we wanted to achieve two things. We wanted first to get all our live hostages back. Nobody believed we could. We did. But everybody assumed that we would only get them on Hamas terms, which means get out of Gaza, allow them to reorganize, allow them to rearm, allow them to make Gaza an enormous threat to Israel again. And I wouldn't do that. So I said, I'll get all the hostages out in one swoop, and with Israel staying in so that we can enforce, if necessary, disarmament and demilitarization. That's what happened. And had to stand against a lot of pressure. And I'm glad President Trump was a full partner of this. We went into Gaza City, put the knife, the military knife, to Hamas's throat in their last stronghold, Gaza City. And President Trump and his team, along with Ron Dermer, put together a 20-point plan, which effectively isolates Hamas. Hamas wanted to isolate us. We isolated them and got the deal. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's incredible. The question though really comes, the second goal of the war was to do away with Hamas. How can we assure that Gaza will be a Hamas-free Gaza in the future?
Well, you have to insist on achieving those two war aims of disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Hamas, making sure that Hamas has no military capability, no governing capability. The 20-point plan wishes to give an opportunity to an international force to do that. Fine, willing to give it a try. But if not, as President Trump has said, it's going to be done one of two ways, either the easy way with the international force or the hard way with Israel. And it'll be done.
When we're talking about the ISF, the International Security Force that's being spoken about, lots of questions in the air of who it comprises of. I don't think anyone knows. Maybe you can shed some light on that. But how can we be sure that it won't be doomed to the same fate as the UN forces that were put into place in Lebanon and southern Lebanon after 1978?
Well, you can't assure it. You can try to do everything to make it successful. But I think we need the right composition. And the United States has been very clear on something we agreed upon, that the only military forces that will enter Gaza in the International Stabilization Force would be those acceptable to Israel. And secondly, look, we always have the backstop, plan B, If this doesn't work, well, then I guess we'll have to do it. But if I can get it done through others, I prefer it.
Are you free to share which nations are on sort of that green list that Israel would be acceptable for Israel to be part of the ISF?
And we're talking to them right now, and I think it's better that we talk to them confidentially. But I think you can also guess which nations are not going to be there. We've talked about that too.
Yeah, definitely. Look, before the war, you had entered into the Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. You look at the whole paradigm was starting to shift in the Middle East in such a tremendous way for Israel and for the West. How has the war, now that it's coming to a close, shifted that? How has it changed that? What's Israel's position with its neighbors today?
Actually, I think it reinforced it. Because look at all the Abraham Accord countries stuck to the Accords. In the midst of a firestorm of a 7-front war, Israel is fighting, 360 degrees. They all stayed in. And I think that now Israel has emerged actually a lot stronger than it was on the 6th of October. Not on the 7th of October when we had this horrible massacre. But if you look at where Israel was before the October 7th attack and where it is today, we're actually stronger. We are rightly considered the strongest power in the Middle East. We've smashed the Iran axis. We've exposed Iran for not being the superpower and the overbearing power that intimidated the entire region and beyond. So Israel's stronger. And when you're strong, nations come to you. First, in silent corridors, then in the open. But that's what's happening now. So I think actually the Abraham Accords have an opportunity now. We have an opportunity to expand them to other countries, and don't look at the surface noise. I'm telling you from below the surface that there are important advances that we're making. I hope they succeed, but I think they have a chance to succeed because of the emergence and predominance of Israeli power.
How much does the expansion of the Abraham Accords rely upon the success of the 20-point plan?
I think it's related because, if Hamas were to emerge from the wreckage and they would say, oh my God, we have a great victory, which they're trying to do. I don't think anybody believes that. But if we don't finish off Hamas, it'll cast a shadow for sure. So we intend to finish them and finish them off.
And according to most public reports, Saudi Arabia was about to sign on to the Abraham Accords before October 7th. Some reports that I've read have said that Hamas, one of the reasons they launched, the timing of the attack that they launched was in a way to block that. Are we going to see Saudi Arabia back at the table soon with Israel?
Well, I hope so, and I'd rather not engage in public proclamations. I don't think that does any useful thing. I think either there is a mutual interest or there isn't, and I think there is, actually stronger than ever.
So the players on the board here in the Middle East are pretty complicated. I think that's a diplomatic way to put it. We have Turkey and Qatar, whose international standing, from my perspective, has really risen as a result of their roles in the war, or maybe in resolving the war, depending on your perspective or on someone's perspective. How does Israel view Qatar and Turkey, who seem to play both sides, take positions, pro-Western positions, and also at the same side pursue interests that are counter to the interests of the West?
Well, I think they have to be sort of confronted with this question. Are Are you on our side or not on our side? Now, nations have composite and sometimes conflicting interests, but you shouldn't be swept away by naivete. If you can get them on your side, completely good. If not, recognize who you're dealing with, and don't be swept away with rose-colored glasses. So you can get what you can get, but be careful not to endanger any of your core interests. And that's the way I approach countries that are not full allies. That's the way I look at them. And these countries, certainly, Turkey has been very oppositional. That's an understatement. Very hostile to Israel and to Zionism in recent years, and that's unfortunate because there shouldn't be a clash between us. But we're with our eyes open, and Qatar has had its problems. Its involvement on U.S. campuses, Al Jazeera, which was just poisoning the minds of billions. And I've said this to the Qataris. I said, I appreciate your help in getting the hostages out, but I also recognize the things that we were very concerned with, and we'd like you to move away from those and become a positive partner. And I said that quite openly, and I'll say it again. I'm saying it here.
I was privileged enough to be at the Knesset when President Trump was there with the U.S. delegation up in the bleachers, but watching that, it was really a tremendous event. What was it like from your perspective to have the U.S. president there sort of on a triumphant visit as the war was coming to a close?
I think it was great. I think it was an unforgettable visit, an unforgettable speech. I think it swept all Israelis and many around the world in understanding the strength of our alliance and the importance of America under President Trump coming back to the world scene, becoming a dominant power, shaping events, and helping change the Middle East together. That's basically what we did. On the second or third day of the war, I said, this horror of horrors, we get this massacre that we've not had since the Holocaust of October 7th. And then we get Hezbollah joining in. And I said, nobody believed me at that time, but I believed me. I said, we're going to change the face of the Middle East. Well, President Trump thinks the same way. And on many things, we see exactly eye to eye. So we're moving in tandem to do that. And I think the speech in the Knesset did two things. One, it really communicated the depth of the alliance, the sympathy of the alliance. It's not one that doesn't have problems. Every alliance has problems. But this is so central, so important for Israel's future, and I think also for the future of the alliances of America around the world. I think that was communicated very strongly. And the second was that that President Trump is a unique leader. I don't remember any president who's had this sweeping and personal influence in shaping events around the world. I think it was a fusion of these two things that was absolutely remarkable and unforgettable.
Yeah, absolutely, and hilarious as well.
It was funny.
Yeah, and most people didn't see this, I don't think, but it's important, I think, for the American audiences to know that the entire political spectrum of Israel was supporting him there on that day on what he was saying and his support for Israel.
Some of them grudgingly so, but that's okay. But yeah. The vast majority, I think people were surprised also by the strength of the support for him, and he told me he was surprised by the strength of the support for me, because he's reading these fake polls that are coming out in our so-called mainstream media. But you should look at the polls that have been right over time. And what you saw in the Knesset, and he told me this, what I saw in the Knesset was massive support for you, told me, for you, Bibi. And I said, well, that just reflects what's out there in the field. And I was very happy with both the great support for him and, frankly, the positive support that he witnessed for me, because otherwise you wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know. There's so much disinformation, so much vilification, so much degradation that actually helped. And I like that very much, obviously.
For those of us, as you know, are very supportive of Israel and the United States. This week, though, there were a few comments that were made that raised some questions on the relationship. We know it's a close relationship, where the administration made comments on the vote on declaring sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Also, the president made a comment on the release of Barghouti and his role on that. What kind of role do you think the U.S. should play in Israeli domestic matters? And is there a line by which allies, even the greatest allies, should stand behind?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, notwithstanding this or that comment, I mean, we have a great alliance of partners. You know, it's interesting the way the pendulum swings. I was in Washington a few weeks ago, and they said Netanyahu controls America and America's defense policy. Okay, and then it flipped. America controls Netanyahu, and it controls Israel's defense policy. Neither argument, neither statement is true. Israel is an independent country. The United States is definitely an independent country, and we are partners. We're not a proxy. We're not a subservient power. We're an independent state, and we fashion our own security policy and follow it. We defend ourselves by ourselves, and we decide what is dangerous for us, and we act accordingly, both in preventing attacks, say along the new yellow line in Gaza. And if you attack us, we attack you immediately back. But if you prepare an attack, we go and wipe you out. We just did in Gaza, as we do in Lebanon. It's not only if you attack, Hezbollah attacks us, but if it organizes to attack us. So we're not asking permission from our American friends. We just tell them that's what we're doing. And that's fine. That's the way it should be. And I think that's understood. But America has its own interest. I recognize that. And we want to see America succeed where it can. It should be the great power that it is now, and it should continue to be, because that's good for Israel. And America, what's good for America is, I think both the Vice President said and Marco Rubio said, they want a strong and independent Israel, because that's the anchor of security in the Middle East. And if Israel weren't here, a strong Israel wasn't here, there wouldn't be a Middle East. It would collapse under Iran in 2 seconds. And they know that.
Mr. Prime Minister, final question, just a personal question. The last 2 years, you've had the whole world crashing down on you, putting all the pressure, not just externally, but internally in Israel. You set a mission that you wanted to achieve with this war after the attack of October 7th. And everyone was pressuring you to do things differently, whether it was the Biden administration or all the way towards the end. You held fast to your beliefs and to your strategy, and you got to where you are now, which is, decimated Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, etc. And Israel is now seeing the other side of this war. On a personal level, as a leader, what does that feel like? What position do you feel like you're in now after going through all of that?
Well, I think when you're in the eye of the storm, you have to decide if you're going to be swept by the storm or you're going to be a rock in the storm. And if you're swept by the storm, Israel would have suffered an enormous defeat, and America would have suffered an enormous defeat. It would have been a triumph for the Iran axis if we accepted all the pressures that were put on us, both from abroad and from inside, domestic pressure by the deep state, by the left and others, to stand still, that is, to not go into Rafah, not capture the Philadelphia corridor, basically surrender to Hamas demands. And if we did that, then Sinwar would have been alive, and Def would have been alive, and Nasrallah would have been alive, and Syria would be still run by Assad, and Iran would still lord it over everyone, thinking that they're going to have in 2 seconds or in 2 minutes atomic bombs to annihilate everyone in sight. That's what would have happened. And of course, I couldn't agree to that. And so the reason I could withstand the storm is that I knew that if I capitulated to it, there would be no Israel. It's as simple as that. And when you're in a leadership position, you have to do what is not only what is right, but what is absolutely necessary. So I had no qualms about that, but I had great support. I'll tell you where. I had great support first from my family, and first and foremost from my wife, who's been my rock through thick and thin. And I think eventually people will know the importance of her extraordinary support for me, for my family, and for the country. And equally, I'll tell you who I had as the greatest supporter: the soldiers of Israel and the people of Israel. The vast majority of the people, and almost every single soldier that I met during the war. I would go into Gaza, I'd go into to the Lebanese border, and I met all these soldiers coming from across the country, their commanders who are incredible, the division commanders and others, and they said, "Prime Minister, keep going, don't stop, don't surrender." And I'll tell you, that's a lot of help. And you're serving a larger cause and a larger purpose. It goes back to the millennial dream of not only establishing a Jewish state, an independent Jewish state in our ancient homeland here in Israel, in Judea, Samaria, and the rest of the land of Israel. It goes back to the fact that our generation now is charged with preserving that dream, keeping it going, assuring its vitality. So I think I had great support. You may have thought that I was isolated, but I didn't feel that way. I felt that I had the best support that any leader can hope for.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all the work that you do, and thanks.
Thank you.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Like you saw, I was eager to ask a few more questions. I may or may not have been slipped a note saying last question. If not, I would have kept going. To my wife, Lisa, I know you wanted me to ask about Jonathan Netanyahu, his brother of blessed memory, so I'll do it here in the closing. I didn't get to ask him because the interview was cut just a couple minutes short, but I was going to ask, if you all know, his brother Jonathan Netanyahu, Yoni Netanyahu, fell in the raid of Entebbe in 1976. And his book, The Letters of Jonathan Netanyahu, is required reading in my house for my kids. It's required reading really for anybody. If you want to understand the feelings of a true Zionist, you know, the Netanyahu family traveled to the United States for several years. That's where Prime Minister Netanyahu was educated. His brother was there as well, and he was writing letters to his girlfriend about what it's like to be in the United States and yearning to come back to Israel and to be part of the building of the state of Israel. He does ultimately come back, and then he continues to write letters about his service. And just those letters are just so powerful. And I was going to ask the Prime Minister, and many times he's been asked about his brother. He's spoken about it. He has another brother, but about this brother who passed, and how the loss of his brother on a mission to save Jews in the mission, in the Entebbe mission there, how that impacts his day-to-day life, especially when facing the most difficult decisions. And that was a question my wife asked me to ask him. Lisa, I'm sorry I didn't get to ask him, but I'm putting it out here to the public. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe. The only way we can grow this show is if you do that. So please go ahead and do that. Make sure to share, comment. Even if you disagree, we want to hear from you. See you next time.